Scottish independence, all sides agreed that the matter had been settled in 2014 for a generation after the first referendum. Do you just keep holding them until you get your own way?
And everybody accepted the result after 2014. You know, the evidence of that is Scotland is not independent, but support for independence in Scotland has continued to increase since 2014. It's now, I think most polls would tell us, the majority position in Scotland. And of course, the other point here is that things changed pretty dramatically after 2014. The Brexit referendum, whereby Scotland has been taken out of the EU against our will, really changed fundamentally the nature of the UK. And actually in 2014, one of the key arguments the No campaign made was that voting no was essential to protect our EU membership, and the opposite turned out to be true.
If Brexit changed things, has the pandemic shifted sentiment again and blunted the argument for a referendum? Because actually, for many Scots, the priority is on sorting out the pandemic.
Throughout the pandemic, we've actually seen support for independence in Scotland in opinion polls increase.
The opinion polls show that actually the country's very, very divided on the matter of independence. You don't have a clear momentum for independence. It's very, very evenly split.
Sure.
It's not...
Well, actually, I think you cannot objectively come to the view that there has not been a marked increase in support for independence since 2014. There has been. I think the polling evidence suggests now a majority of Scots who want independence, but yes, there's a significant number who don't. And that comes back to this point. In a democracy, how do you settle that? You settle that by letting people decide. And on a constitutional issue, that has to be through a democratic, legal, legitimate referendum.
If I go to your roadmap for a referendum, you say it should be held after the pandemic at a time to be decided by the democratically elected Scottish Parliament. What's your time frame on this?
If the pandemic allows it, then I think Scotland should have a choice, and I've said if it allows it in the first half of the parliamentary term, that is, you know, a 2.5 year period.
Is the SNP a single issue party?
No, and I don't think anybody that knows anything about Scottish politics could make that argument. We are a party that's social and economic, policy-wise, are a progressive party that is about building a better Scotland. We just think independence is a key part of that.
But just to be clear, First Minister, a vote for the SNP in this election is a vote for independence, isn't it?
A vote for the SNP in this election is firstly a vote for experienced leadership to get us through COVID. Secondly, it's a vote for that progressive, bold, transformational policy programme that we're putting forward to kickstart and drive recovery. And yes, then after the pandemic, it's a vote to give people the choice of independence in a referendum.
If you were pro Nicola Sturgeon and pro Nicola Sturgeon being First Minister but not pro independence,
you'd vote against independence in a referendum, presumably.
You couldn't vote for you, could you? Well, because you wouldn't want the referendum that you're trying to put on the table.
Well, plenty of people do.
But voters do need to be clear that if they vote for the SNP, they are going to get this
Beth,
referendum.
I think most people who live in Scotland are very clear about the SNP.
OK, well, let's just move on to the mandate for the referendum. You say again in your roadmap that if the SNP takes office, the Scottish Government will again request a Section 30 order from the UK Government, believing and publicly contending that in such circumstances there could be no moral or democratic justification for denying that request. But that's not how Prime Minister Johnson sees it, isn't it? He won't grant you this referendum. You're stuck.
Well, no, actually, it's the people of Scotland who'll decide their future.
He would say that you had a referendum in 2014.
If you wanted to speak for Boris Johnson, I know you're not speaking for Boris Johnson, but of course he would say that.
It's my job to ask you
I know that,
questions.
I'm sorry, my apologies. Of course he will say that, but that doesn't make him right. And what we set out in the route map is that if we win the election, then we will bring forward the legislation, and if Boris Johnson wants to challenge that legally, which is what he would have to do, then we will rigorously and vigorously defend the position against that challenge.
Just to go over what you're saying that you then expect Boris Johnson to grant the referendum.
No, what I would expect Boris Johnson to do, And the fact that this is a controversial statement perhaps speaks volumes. What I would expect Boris Johnson to do is to respect the democratic decision of the people of Scotland. Yeah. Why should that in any way be controversial?
But if he doesn't, what does he do?
I've just told you. If Boris Johnson wanted to stop it, he would have to take legal action, and we would defend that. But look,
so you would then hold, just to be clear, because so people understand, so you then could hold an advisory referendum without consent from the UK government?
No, if Boris Johnson didn't do that, then by definition it would be a legal referendum. If he did do that, the courts would decide. But actually we're getting ahead of ourselves here, because I believe that if the people of Scotland vote for this, if support for independence continues to increase, then it is not sustainable for any Westminster Prime Minister to stand in its way. And you talk to people in the UK government.
I understand that, and I understand the principle, but I don't see how you make it happen, genuinely.
Well,
you can say it's unsustainable, but
what if he they know it's unsustainable.
But what if he just digs in? What do you do?
You know probably better than I do, because you speak to people in the UK government, presumably, regularly. But I know, because I hear this from within the UK government, they're already considering what they do in these circumstances, because they know they can't stand in the way of a clear democratic demand of the Scottish people.
You would hold a referendum even if you don't get
Beth,
consent from the UK government?
I respectfully suggest that you read what we've set out?
I did read it.
Yeah,
I just don't see how you're going to read Boris Johnson.
Well, Boris Johnson is not somebody who is immune to democracy. No Prime Minister is immune to democracy, even Boris Johnson. This argument that people in Scotland can vote for that, they can demand a referendum, they can vote for the SNP over and over again, but somehow a Westminster Prime Minister can simply stand in its way, is not going to be sustainable. But it also, in the process, perhaps makes the biggest argument for independence that there is.
Just fine. You said about Alex Salmond, there were serious questions about the appropriateness of his political comeback, that it was his ego stopping him from leaving the public stage.
No, look, I trusted Alex Salmond for a long, long time, and I have found out things about Alex Salmond since then that have made me question not just my faith and trust in him, but his fitness for returning to public office.
Would you work with Alex Salmond and Alba to get that referendum?
I've got no plans or intention of working with
But
Alba.
It does say another pro-independence
that was
party.
written before that party was even in existence.
Okay.
So, I've got no intentions of doing that. The polling would suggest...
So you wouldn't work
Alba,
with him?
Look, I've made my position clear, and the polling suggests it's a hypothetical question. But I'm in this election concentrating on putting forward the positive SNP case.
But if you did need to work with him, you wouldn't.
I've said what I've said. I am focused on the SNP winning a majority and being re-elected to government.
On the issue of second referendum, if you don't manage to secure it, would you view that as your political career ending in failure after
Beth, look, I'm in an election campaign. The polls suggest that the SNP right now is on track to win.
Could the May election be a game changer for Scottish independence?
Look, we have an opportunity for it to be a game changer for Scottish politics. For the last 10 years, we've had a politics in Scotland that is all about what divides us rather than what unites us. We have an opportunity to do politics differently. And that's why I want us to come through this election with a better government and a better opposition, focusing on what unites us and focusing on a national recovery.
But just in terms of what the outcome is likely to be or could be, if the SNP do win a majority, does that give Nicola Sturgeon, the SNP, a mandate to call a second referendum?
Well, I'm not going to commentate on what might happen in the result.
But it would give her the ability to claim a mandate if she wins a majority, having campaigned on having a second referendum. It is a mandate, isn't it?
Yeah, but Beth, what that exposes in even more stark terms is the choice people face in this election campaign. We can either choose to have our Parliament focus on the next 5 years
I totally get
argument and on that stushy between
but
the Scottish
if they choose Nicola Sturgeon, it gives them a mandate, doesn't it?
I think Scotland can choose something different. The challenge that you have is Nicola Sturgeon has been on the front trying to lead us through this pandemic, but she has a blind spot. Her blind spot is the Constitution. She is honestly trying to tell people in Scotland that we come through this collective trauma of COVID and we just go back to
I know, but I'm just asking you.
To those old arguments.
I'm just asking you a really
That's the game changer.
I get that, but I'm just asking you a really basic.
You're asking me about the game changer. I'm telling you what the game changer is.
But I'm asking you a very basic question, which is: if Nicola Sturgeon campaigns on having a second referendum and they win a majority, she's got a mandate to do it.
Look, it's her job to argue her own mandate. My job is to argue for what I believe. I don't believe independence or a referendum is the right thing for Scotland coming through this pandemic.
Whether or not you think independence is a good or bad idea, do you accept the principle that it is for the people of Scotland to decide that?
Look, of course I accept the principle that it's for the people of Scotland to decide their future, and that's why they're voting in this election campaign. I don't believe the SNP is going to have a majority coming through this election campaign. I'm arguing for something different. I'm arguing for us to have, in your own words, a game changer. Let's change the frame of Scottish politics. And actually changing the frame of Scottish politics gives us the opportunity to change the frame of UK politics.
So in principle you accept that it's right that the Scottish people decide on their future. You're not really saying whether you think Nicola Sturgeon has a mandate or not for a second ref. You sound a bit like Jeremy Corbyn in the 2019 election talking about Brexit, I have no idea what
Beth,
he thinks.
I've got to say, I've never been accused of that before, so there is a first time for everything. What I'm saying is my position on independence in a referendum is clear. I don't support independence. I don't support referendum. I'm standing in this election to say, let's choose something different.
If the SNP win a majority in Holyrood, they do or don't have a mandate for a second referendum.
I don't believe the SNP are going to win a majority
but if they do,
in this election campaign.
If they do.
I am a participant. I'm not a spectator.
But do you accept they have a mandate or not?
It's easier for
Why
you to,
won't you answer the question?
It's easier for you to commentate on the election. I'm a participant. I want Scotland to choose something different.
But why won't you answer the question?
Which question?
Whether or not SNP majority gives a mandate to call a second referendum.
Because what I'm saying to people
is the most important issue.
What I'm saying is, I'm going to argue for what I believe, and I don't believe independence or a referendum is right for Scotland.
So you don't want it?
I'm going to continue to argue for what I believe.
But not wanting it is different from saying whether or not they have a mandate.
Let people cast their votes on the 6th of May.
So you're saying they don't have a mandate?
Well, not a single vote's been cast yet in this election.
But do you accept that if Nicola Sturgeon wins a majority, that the second referendum question is going to dominate Scottish politics for the next 5 years?
That's the risk, isn't it? And that's what I'm saying directly to people in Scotland, is this is the risk we face of the next 5 years. We have a different choice. And the choice we have is we can have a strong opposition in this country, a better opposition in this country.
But you're not a strong opposition.
It doesn't have to be Douglas
But
Ross.
Labour isn't part of the problem that Labour hasn't been a strong opposition, that Labour has let unionists down.
The challenge is saying to people, if you agree with what I'm saying, if you like what I'm saying, if you want the game changer, Beth, the word that you used, I'm going to start using that more often in this campaign as well, if you want that game changer, then vote Labour in this election.
How worried are you that on a 5-year time frame that Scotland will become an independent country?
I think Scotland will choose something different.
When you say Scotland will choose something different, do you mean in the Holyrood election, or do you mean in an independence referendum that they'll choose to stay in the UK?
I'm talking about the choice that Scotland faces on the 6th of May.
Isn't it wishful thinking to think that Nicola Sturgeon is not going to win a majority?
No, not at all. I don't think anything is inevitable in this contest. I know other politicians might want to think it's inevitable. I'm not as arrogant as that to suggest that if something's inevitable. No one has yet cast their vote, and people can have a choice to choose something different in this election campaign.
Douglas Ross, could the Holyrood election be a game changer for Scottish independence?
Well, clearly we've got two nationalist parties, be it Nicola Sturgeon's nationalists or Alex Salmond's nationalists, who are seeking to dominate the whole of Scottish politics once again with another independence referendum. And what I'm saying and Scottish Conservatives are saying is we need to put that threat away. We need to get rid of that threat to allow us to focus on our recovery and rebuilding after COVID.
Whether you think independence is a good idea or a bad idea, do you accept the principle that it's right for the Scottish people to decide that?
Well, the Scottish people did decide that, of course, back in 2014. We were told then by Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP that referendum was the gold standard of referendums. They would abide by the result of the people of Scotland. More than 2 million Scots, 55%, said they wanted to remain part of the United Kingdom.
If pro-independence parties win a majority in Holyrood, do you accept the principle that they should be able to hold another referendum, or do you just want to block it full stop?
Well, as a Conservative and Unionist, I don't want another damaging, divisive independence referendum.
Would Johnson government ever authorise a second independence referendum?
Well, I've said Conservatives are against another independence referendum, but we know the threat of holding another independence referendum if the SNP win a majority. Now, Scottish Conservatives stopped them getting that majority in 2016. 5 years ago at that election, we more than doubled the number of MSPs.
But if they do win a majority, it's a game changer then, isn't it? But if they win a majority, it's a game changer,
but there's a way to stop that majority.
But all the polling suggests that they are going to win a majority, and it becomes the game changer.
But the polling is very close. At the moment, the SNP only need 4 extra seats to get that majority to take us through another damaging, divisive independence referendum. But we can stop that, and the way we stopped it 5 years ago was people uniting behind the strongest pro-UK party, the Scottish Conservatives, by giving us their votes on the party list vote, stop that SNP majority and stop that damaging, divisive
But
independence
you're acknowledging
referendum.
in that very answer that if the SNP win a majority, then there will be an argument they will have a right to push for that referendum, because that's what they've been elected on.
Well, people
have given them the majority for it.
So people absolutely have to understand that is the risk of voting SNP. Nicola Sturgeon is trying to say it's about the way she's handled this pandemic or about other policies she's bringing forward, but a vote for the SNP is a vote to divide our country again and hold another independence referendum to separate Scotland from the UK.
How's Brexit changed things though?
I think many people see the uncertainty with Brexit and don't want to go through all that again with Scottish independence. Look at how difficult it was to come out of a union we'd been part of for 40 plus years rather than a union we're connected with for over 300 years.
I was thinking of it rather on the basis that a Conservative government in Westminster took Scotland out of the European Union when Scottish voters wanted to remain in. That's quite hard for Scots to take, isn't it?
But more than
Boris Johnson took them out of the EU when nearly 2-1 Scottish people did not want that to happen.
But more than 1 million people in Scotland did vote to leave the European Union, and when we voted in 2016 we knew it was part of a UK franchise.
62% of Scottish people wanted to remain in the European Union. Do you not think that Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP have an argument to say that Scottish people are not being represented by this government?
We knew in 2016 the votes taken in Scotland, England, Wales and Northern Ireland would be combined together for a UK result, whether to leave or stay in the EU.
With it,
but
mustn't you?
where I don't feel uncomfortable is just looking at our vaccination rollout here in Scotland and across the UK. No, but that is something that we have been able.
Brexit was a paradigm shift.
But that is something we have been able to do as a result of Brexit.
If the SNP do win a majority in Holyrood, what do you say to the Prime Minister about what you do next?
Well, I'm not going to focus on that. I think there's a strong opportunity to stop that SNP majority by people coming behind the Scottish Conservatives, that tried and tested model that stopped an SNP majority 5 years ago, and then we can get rid of the question of another independence referendum and focus on our recovery.
But you can only change the focus of Scottish politics away from a second referendum if the SNP are not the major party here and do not win Holyrood, and it looks like they are going to. So if it does happen, how does the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom try and stop a second referendum? Do you just say we're not doing it?
Well,
it's really hard to do that,
I
isn't
don't
it?
think you would expect me to concede an election before the votes have been cast, before they've been counted, and before we've seen an opportunity, again, as we did in 2016, for the Scottish Conservatives to stop that SNP majority. We can then focus on the other issues.
You're not going to be able to stop it, though, are you?
But people said that back in 2016. Remember, the SNP went into that election with a majority.
And how important, then, is this election?
I mean, it's massive, and I've said the future of our country is at stake. Is that crystal clear? That is the issue at stake at this election. When we can park that issue, when we can stop that SNP majority, then we can focus on recovery and all the other issues that most people in Scotland want their parliament to be focused on.
Is the prospect of Scotland becoming independent, do you see it as a realistic possibility?
Well, it worries me for my, I've got a 2-year-old boy. I want him to grow up in a Scotland and a UK that I did, and all the opportunities I had. And I don't think we will help the next generation by separating from the United Kingdom, the most powerful and successful economic and political union the world has ever seen. So there are so many positives of working together, of uniting, of being one family of 4 nations, building together in good times and bad, working together through a pandemic. And I think there are many opportunities to come, and that's all put at threat with the risk of another independence referendum.
And this is the list of parties and their leaders or lead candidates standing across Scotland at the elections this Thursday. More details about your constituency and the candidates standing there can be found on your local council web pages.